Welcome back to another reading uncorrecting of Bottom Rung, the last one of this book. This, chapter 64, is the last chapter of the book. Oh, yeah, with me, Kindar, the Tiger Right, and Ty, the supervisor. He had to remind me to say it. Forget. There we go. The darkness was filled with sounds. "Why is he waking up?" a woman demanded, and the answer dissolved into mist. The sounds weren't alone. Shadows flitted around the darkness, sometimes in unison with the sounds, others not. "No, I am not leaving," the man said. "You clerics had your chance. Tibs is going to pull out of this without your help." Here was Tibs. He was in the darkness, but he didn't remember why. Why he'd come here. Why he'd wanted to cut himself from. Why he'd done this. With the darkness came sensation, discomfort, something he didn't want to feel anymore. "Why didn't you call for me?" a man yelled. "What would you have done, Alistair?" Another answered. "You think I don't have enough to deal with already? The nobles are demanded to be led into the dungeon because they paid for it. Let them," Alistair snapped. "Let the dungeon eat them instead of these children." "I would if I could, but it's closed off again." We barely got the boy, his team, and Bardic out before another slab of dungeon stone came down. Any later, and we would have been trapped in there, eaten ourselves. The man was wrong. Tibbs didn't know how we knew this. Tibbs didn't know how he knew, but the dungeon wouldn't have kept them in. He'd waited until they were all out before sealing himself shut. Why had he sealed himself? In the darkness came memory of pain. A woman lying on rags, a boy curled up against her, clutching to her corpse, unable to understand what had been, that he was alone now. Cold, cutting through him, the rags on his back not enough to keep him warm. The pain of not sleeping because he was afraid that that his small fire would go out, and with it so would his life. A beating when he wasn't fast enough from snatching the cooling bread on the windowsill, but the satisfaction of having taken a few bites out of it before he was caught, of finally having something to quiet his stomach. The pain of landing on hard dirt, the fear of what was coming, looking for a way out of the cell. But the guards had taken all that was his, and they were watching them in the cell. Laughing. This was the end for him. He knew. A thief with only one hand didn't live long. Pain of making new friends. The pain of making friends. A girl with a bow, a woman with a sword, a man with an amulet, others, there and then dead. He'd joined them. Dungeon food was all he was good for. That was why he'd been sent here, to feed the dungeon. "How did you know?" man asked. He knew the voice. He'd heard it in the darkness, talking to Alistair. "It's my job to protect this place, and he managed to sneak all that corruption under my nose. How did you know what he was doing?" Tibs knew, he realized, because he played a part in it. This thing. This thing lets anyone follow where I've been, Bardigat told him, indicating the brand on his left wrist. "And I'd rather not no one know I'm involved in this." So he'd gotten Tibs to drop the message stone, signaled the time was right for something. He knew what Bardic was up to because the dungeon had called for him, yelled in pain, and Tibs had heard. It was something Tibs could do that no one else did. Something about him was different. "Clever boy," an old man said, "but not clever enough." Pain. Pain so deep it would erase him completely. Pain he took on so the dungeon wouldn't have to. He'd already suffered enough. Tibs cried out and sat, his legs coated with water and ice to keep he coated his leg with water and ice to keep the man from hurting him. The man cursed and stepped away, shaking his hand. White robes, best cowl. "Well, you're awake." Tibbs noticed the eyes before the man turned and headed for the door. How pale they were. Not pale, something else. Something that had to do with the white robes. Where was he? How had he gotten here? The room was small, walls with tapestries. The bed was softer than the one in his room, the room he shared with his team, softer even than the one in the inn. This was a noble's room, not one he should be caught in. He threw his legs off the side and nearly fell as pain lanced through his body. He swallowed the cry. He couldn't let them know he was here. Nobles didn't take kindly to anyone who snuck in their home, let alone slept in their bed. Tibs, a man said, and he tried to run for the window. He could jump out. Once outside, it would be more place to hide. Wait until he was better. Hands raised him off the floor. Tibs, you need to stay in bed. They placed him back there, pulled the cover over his body. Alistair? Where am I? At the guild, in the room for the visitors. I'm not a visitor. I need to get back to my team. I'll miss our turn in the dungeon. That was wrong, but he couldn't think why. You need to rest first. You did something very brave, Tibs, but it came at a cost. No, not again. He swallowed the pain. As much as he didn't want to know, he had to. Who died? You almost did, Tibs. No one else? No one that matters to you. Oh, that's good then. The man said something, but darkness claimed Tibs again. Tibs devoured the bowl of stew as fast as his body let him, which was a lot slower than he preferred. Moving any part of his body came with pain, pain deep inside him, from the essence coursing through his body. It was no longer white, it had a purple tint to it, as if corruption was his element, but it wasn't. The tint was the corruption that had infected it. What none of the clerics who tried to heal him could remove from his body. They couldn't affect the essence. How are you feeling? Kamdar asked. He was alone. The guild wouldn't let more than one of his team visit him at a time to avoid tiring Tibs out, they said. Hungry? Tibs chuckled. I can see that. Do they know you saved me? Kamdar shook his head. Did not. You saved yourself, Tibs. You have the strongest will to live I have ever encountered. Tibs nodded. I remember what you did. Then you remember there was so much corruption for me to do anything significant. It spread almost as fast for me to absorb its strength. Almost. Tibs scraped the bottom of the bowl and wished he had more bread. When are they going to let me out? Once you are better, Alistair said from the doorway. Like they can do anything anymore, Tibs said, putting the bowl on the side table. Can I get more? Maybe later, his teacher said. You need to rest now. I will let the others know you are doing better, Dar said, standing. Tell Jackal to bring some candies when you visit. Don't, Lester said. Tibs need food, not candies. What I need is to walk a roof. Tibs crumpled as Kamdar left. The door is here, Tibs. If you can reach it without help, you can walk a roof. Tibs got out of bed and nearly toppled over as pain in his legs shut up. Holding onto the bed, he made it to the end, and Alistair stepped into the hall to give Tibs room. The entire wing was room for visitors, of which there were few right now. It was 6 steps to the door. Tibs made it halfway there before the pain was too much. Alistair caught him and helped him back to his bed. Maybe tomorrow, the man said, and he pulled Tibs' cover over. He pulled the covers over Tibs. At least you have clothes on now, Jekyll said, closing the door behind him. Someone left my door open when they left, and I was walking around the bed. A man walked by, saw me, screamed, and Alistair left me closed after that. City folks are weird. Some can be. My father cut Tibs as he nearly fell, and he felt the lumps of candy in his hand. Let me help you back to your bed, and we can talk. Has anyone told you what's been going on? Tibs sat and snuck the candies under the thick pillow. Dungeon's closed. A lot of the nobles are gone. Knuckles questioned everyone they caught that night, but they didn't say anything. Not who provided them the corruption, not if someone paid them to kill the dungeon, not even if Bardic was really the leader. Tibs nodded and slipped the candy in his mouth and let the sweetness wash over him. It was a pleasant contrast to the constant pain in his limbs. Is the dungeon? Jekyll trailed off. Tibs shrugged. The dungeon hadn't called for him, but he didn't know if that was because he was too far, or still was dead, or still healing. Tibs thought that the closed door was a good sign. Still wouldn't have locked everyone out if he'd been dying. Tibbs, I'm going to be heading to Mountain Sea with Crow and his family. They're leaving? Without a dungeon to bring people here, no one's staying. But he'll open again. But he'll open up again. Do they know when? Tibbs shook his head. They aren't giving up the inn, but the merchants talked with the guild and they agreed that without knowing if the dungeon is going to open, they have to think about their business. The guild is forcing them to pay a small leasing fee to keep the building, so a lot of the merchants are permanently leaving. But Crow's dad can pay for the one for the inn since they have the other one in Mountain Sea. When are you leaving? Tomorrow. Everything's already packed. You can come visit when you're better. I know Crow's going to demand you. Is Crow's going to demand you do? You'd get to finally see the sea, since I'm pretty sure you never did last time. Tibbs nodded. The door opened and Harry stood in it. Jekyll sighed. That's my signal to get out of here. Harry closed the door once Jekyll left. Did you know what you were part of? The man asked. Tibbs shook his head. He didn't know if he would have told Bardic no if he'd known that killing the dungeon was the plan. Back then, the dungeon was this evil creature that ate everyone Tibbs cared about. I'm glad. As much as of a pain in the ass as Jackie Boy is, all this is turning out to be good for him, and you're part of that. Tibbs waited for the questions. He didn't know how he'd explain things without lying, without revealing secrets, but too much had happened. Harry just stood there. Don't you want to know why? Tibbs asked, unable to stand the silence. Harry shook his head. You're lying. The man smiled. I've been around long enough to learn there are things I don't want to know. If I ask you, no matter what you tell me, I'll know the truth, a version of it. That isn't something I can stop doing. The light is too deep in me. So I pick when I ask my questions. Did you question Bardic? I did. And he found the one method to keep me from learning the truth. He kept silent. He's been sent to prison. This isn't the type of crime we can just brand and ignore. That man will never see the sky again. If Bardic had remained silent, it wasn't why Harry didn't know. It was why Harry didn't know how the man had grown old, how he'd also grown weaker, Tibbs suspected. He'd taken so much essence from him, he'd lowered his ranking. How much, Tibbs didn't know. He knew his essence was denser now, although that meant the corruption in it was also ran deeper. Is there anything he can do to regain his freedom? No. I don't think you understand the severity of what that man did. To destroy a dungeon is to attack the guild at its core. We exist to protect them. If you hadn't stopped him, there's no telling what his actions might have sparked. Others might think dungeons could be killed. Kings might decide we can't maintain our hold on them. We'd go back to the chaos of old. We can't let that happen, Tibbs. So I won't be able to talk to him. Batman will never talk to someone from outside the prison he will be kept in. I know you thought he was your friend, but he's a criminal. I know. Pull the cover up, and Harry left him. Stepping out of the guild building wasn't the act of freedom Tibbs expected. He was still in pain, but he could endure it. What are you doing? Kirino demanded, running in his direction. She was the only person on the street. I was going to help you. I thought you'd gone home, Tibbs said. Mez had stopped by to say goodbye. Had stopped. Mez had come to say goodbye. Kamdar had been bemused with the bracelet, with his official freedom to come and go as he wanted until he was called back. Home isn't really a place I should go to. I should go right now. She took his arm, and Tibbs fought the urge to pull from it. He'd been in bed for weeks now. The clerics did their thing to him, so his body didn't become bedsick, and now that he could move, he didn't want to be helped. Where are you going, then? I'm going to visit a few capitals, see if I can gain entry into the study halls. This is opening a lot more doors than just the transport platform, indicated the bracelet on her left wrist. What about you? I'm going to look for home, he said. I can help you if you want. Tibbs shook his head. It's my thing to do. We're a team, Tibbs. That doesn't stop because the dungeon closed for a while. He shrugged. I want to do it alone. He didn't want his team to see what he planned to do to those men once he found them. Okay, but if you change your mind, I'm going to leave that city. What city I mean with Jackal and Croseth. He nodded. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs to the transport platform. Aren't you coming? I thought we could see those two before we go our separate ways. There's something I need to do before I leave. He motioned toward the mountains. Are you sure? He nodded. Okay, but you better come visit, or I'll chase you down. She stepped up, and a lone person in golden robe by the platform joined her. Once they were gone, Tibs headed for the clearing. Climbing the stairs left him without breath. He counted to make sure Stowe hadn't added more since the last time, and Tibs had to accept he was in such bad a shape climbing a dozen steps was nearly too much for him. He looked at the wall for any sign of corruption and only found some discoloration where he thought the rips in the stone blocking the door had been. He leaned against the stone and let himself slide down, sighing once his leg no longer had to support his weight. How are you doing? He asked. Sorry it took me this long. I've been healing too. Stowe didn't reply. He closed his eyes and let the sun warm him. This was much better than a warm room. I wish I knew when you'll reopen. As crazy as it sounds, I like doing the runs, as dangerous as they are. He wished he knew for certain Stowe was still alive, but his senses didn't reach so deep he could feel the boulder. Is talking to yourself something you do a lot of? The woman asked, and Tibs opened his eyes. He didn't have the strength to act on the spike of fear. Thump licked his face. Chuckling, Tibs pushed the dog away. What have you done to my dog? Thump isn't supposed to like anyone. I promised him jerky once. A bribe? You're taking a bribe from one of Jackie's friends? The promise of a bribe. Tibs dug his fingers into the thick fur. That's even worse. Thump, he's Jackie's friend. You can't trust him. What are you doing here, Serba? Tibs asked. I thought everyone left. A few of us has to say, make sure none of the townsfolk can't leave. We can't leave, do anything stupid, like try to get into the dungeon or stealing the town or something like that. For some reason, Harry decided I get to be one of the lucky ones who don't get to go home. Maybe it's for the way you treat Jackal. She snorted. Harry doesn't care what I do to Jackie, so long as I don't break the precious rules. Speaking of which, where is my brother? He laughed a while back. She sighed. Of course he gets to leave. The world is so unfair. She whistled, and Thump looked at her. She whistled again, and he whined. She raised an eyebrow, pointed to the space next to her. Tibs chuckled as the dog slowly walked to where she indicated and sat, looking mournful. So you know, no one's allowed here. That's why I came. I saw her form and had to investigate. If I'd had Ripper, I would have sent her after you. She looked at Thump. I know she hasn't picked him over me. I'll make sure to carry Jerky with me from now on, Tibs said, and she glared at him. Do you have any idea how much work it takes to get one of them to be disobedient? The promise of Jerky, Tibs said, and Thump's hair went up. No, Serba told the dog, who licked his chump. Next time, Tibs promised. She narrowed his eyes at him. You can't be here. I'll be gone by the time you return with Harry. I don't need to get him to. I saved the dungeon, Tibs said. I think I'm allowed some time to talk with him. Serba seemed to look for something to say, and just shook her head and walked down the stairs. Thump looked at him, whined, and joined her when she whistled. Tibs sighed. Well, I'd have made a friend of her, but Jekyll doesn't like her, so it's fine. He rested his head against the stone. It'd be nice to get a sign you're still there, Stowe. After a few seconds of silence, Tibs struggled to his feet. Tibs? Kenny said, sounding like she was far. Stowe's not in a condition to reply, but thank you for what you did. Tibs smiled. You look after him. I'll stop by every so often to see how he's doing. He felt better walking down the stairs. He was still in pain, but now he knew he'd succeeded. He still was alive, and it made the pain bearable. And this concludes chapter 64 of Bottom Rung, as well as book 1 of the Dungeon Runner series. I will be posting book 2 at some point when it's ready. If you are enjoying this, hit the thumbs up because I'll be posting another book. Hit the bell to be informed. Hit a thumbs up to let me know you like this, and share with your friends. If you want to read book 2, it's on Royal Road. The link is in the notes. And as well as a link to my Patreon, should you want to support me so I can continue doing this for a living. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.